Where did you walk?
We just went down to the trail, down Bailey Park alongside the river. That's one of our go-to places. Cooper is he has mixed feelings about the dog park. Sometimes he's, ready to check it out, but most times not. And so we walk near it to
Yeah.
kind of catch that fix. But the sun was great. Um, the that part of the park this time of day has a lot of sun, and it's closer to the road, so there's a sense of safety and
Yeah. Yeah.
the nature. And there, I didn't take a picture of it. There was this cool little nest, and I was pretty sure it was a hummingbird nest. And I really wanted to know. That perpetually curious 2-year-old inside of me was like, well, who made this, and why, what, when? And I kept walking. Though put us on a time crunch so we could squeeze everything in.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad you squeezed it in. I'm glad you made it here on time, and we are live. This
Oh,
is Stories at Sundown. I'm Mac McCullough. I'm here at Willard Library, even though I have the appearance of sitting in front of the old Post Theater in downtown Battle Creek in our heyday. But I'm here with Laura Otte, who I've known for oh, uh, 10 years, maybe. I don't know, something like that. Laura, you're doing the math.
I was. It's about 16, I think.
What's
16.
that?
It's around 16 or so years, I believe.
16 or so years.
Oh,
Wow.
wait, no, is it longer than that?
Well, that's okay.
Yes, yes, it's
People aren't here to hear that.
right.
But when the theme of your next chapter came up, I thought, who is more well versed at creating a next chapter than Laura Otte? Laura is today a consultant, a certified coach. She builds community, and we'll talk a little bit about that. She's done many things in her past. She's a George Award winner in Battle Creek for helping to, and that's why I thought that was 2011, but maybe it
Mhm,
was later. It was 2011. Well, I knew you then.
mhm.
Um, in coordinating an effort in response to the huge Memorial Day weekend storm that we had that was so devastating. We might talk a little bit about that. And she also more recently organized a community response in the early days of the COVID outbreak, just connecting people to resources and other things. And that's a great way to segue because that's really the theme of our whole conversation today is connectedness. Laura, welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I'm excited. I'm excited. So, why don't we just start by telling people a little bit about where you are right now? I mean, I said you're a consultant, coach, community building. What are those things? I mean,
Oh, that's a complicated question always. And when people say you've got to have your elevator speech, I say, how many people actually ride in elevators? So, I do a lot of things, but the common thread really for me is, that sense of connectedness and walking alongside people and communities in figuring out how we leverage what our assets are, how we navigate challenges. Really also opening doors or finding opportunities, connecting folks to whatever it is they might need. And that looks different in many ways. There was actually a podcast that helped me make those through lines. So it was, in short, a woman who had studied opera and was an operatic singer, but had come into this opportunity to be a radio show host, and that was something else that she did. And people were kind of confused, like, why would you go to school for this? This is your passion, and you're talking on a radio show. And she said she realized that in both of those instances she was using her voice to influence the world. And so for me, it's that, how can I leverage connection to influence, make the world a better place, people or places better than I found them, and myself too. So um, the real kind of explicit ways that that's showing up for me in this current moment in time, I'm working with a couple nonprofit organizations, helping them with some fund development and kind of community strategizing. I'm also privileged to have the opportunity to work with the city of Battle Creek to do some administration of ARPA dollars, also working with nonprofit organizations. So in that example, it's how do we make
What
the best.
ARPA dollars are.
Oh, I'm sorry, what's that?
Well, explain to folks what ARPA dollars are.
Sure, great acronyms. American Rescue Plan Act dollars, which were made available by the federal government to offset the negative impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic. And so, with that, local governments were able to access funds, or they could choose not to. It was up to them. But the city of Battle Creek decided to allocate a portion of those dollars to local organizations so that they can invest in community projects. And so that's been a great journey. I'm also doing some coaching with various individuals for a variety of reasons. Some it's folks that are trying to decide what they want to do with their lives, whether that be they're going into retirement years, what's their identity outside of maybe a 50-hour work week. Also, some professionals that are trying to determine what their career pathway is like, and doing some racial healing circles with Truth, Racial Healing, and Transformation, which is deeply impactful for myself in particular. But yeah, that's some of the things.
Yeah, it's a lot. I'm thinking back in the Harwood days, and you facilitating conversations then. I think I was your note taker a couple of times, but
Oh, yes, I'm
and one of
sure.
the ones that really sticks in my mind was you facilitated a conversation with young people. I think middle school age, or maybe freshmen. It wasn't older kids. And one of the things that really struck me about the conversation is how they articulated that they wanted to be proud of their community.
Hmm.
That it spoke with a lot of, I thought, affection about where they live and wanting to see that do well, which is not what a lot of people assume that you're going to hear from young people.
And you hit on exactly the key change point and or opportunity is being aware of our own assumptions and how those assumptions are limiting so many things, in particular that ability to be connected, right? So one of the conversations back then that really had an impact on my own life was with Calhoun Community High School students. And so back then, I could admit I didn't really know much about Calhoun Community High School. I just had identified through some partnerships that that was a group of folks that we probably weren't connected to as much, young people, and an assumption that they maybe didn't have as many opportunities as some of the other public school students. And in those conversations, I mean, similarly, such incredible wisdom and such a deep appreciation for their own role in the world around them. And in contrast, the community perception of who students were that went to the school. And so one of my coworkers, I had presented some of that qualitative data at work, and I loved her vulnerability. She said, I'm embarrassed to say this, but when I would go by that school with my husband, I would tell him to speed up. And so there was this fear, right? And psychologically, we fear the unknown. But to think of her experience driving on the exterior of the building and my experience being inside, having a conversation in person with these students was absolutely life changing. And it made me especially passionate about changing that narrative. I also, as a result of that, did some service on their board. And it happens every day. We sometimes we're not even conscious of what our minds are telling us other people are about. But the majority of the time, it's either inaccurate or it's just barely, the a taste of who they really are, what they're going through in that moment, why they're in that place that they're at that time, why maybe they are upset or not engaging. One of the favorite things in doing community work is, well, not favorite, one of the most common things I've encountered is this idea that if someone's not there, that they don't care. And that's just not true. We're all strapped for time. So many people don't have the resources that they need. if we could make a list of all the things we wanted to do in a day, I'm sure it would be pretty long, but what we're actually able to do is quite different.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, this might seem like an obvious or obvious. There might seem to be an obvious answer to this question, um, but what is different about how you approach um, people that others may not see that you elicit those responses? What do you
Mm,
think?
that's an interesting question. So I would say I was kind of reflecting on, what this conversation might look like and, what changed for me. And I do think that part of that was actually being seen myself and knowing how that impacted, excuse me, here I go. I knew this would happen. A little emotional because I'm paying attention. That's why I'm laughing a lot and moved sometimes. Anyway, it's knowing the difference that it makes when someone takes a moment to acknowledge your presence. And when you experience something like that in a time in your life that is especially trying, I mean, that doesn't leave you, right?
Right.
You don't forget that. And so certainly having some of the same experiences as folks that I've known, it's important to connect to. I think that helps me show up more authentically.
Yeah. Yeah, I wanted to talk a little bit because, I think when I met you, you were working at the Substance Abuse Council. Is that
Mhm.
correct? Yeah.
Yes. Mhm.
And that was a transition from, I don't know if it was dipping a toe or if you were all the way into a more corporate kind of, uh, at least path. And from there, you know, on and on and on. I mean, the Storm, United Way, Harwood, you know, and to what you're doing now. I mean, what's been your compass as you've navigated these changes, and why do you think you're on the path you are on now, and how did you get on it?
Yeah, well, that's a lot.
Yeah, it's a
Yeah.
2-hour program, so take your time.
Well, I think one of the, things with the Substance Abuse Council, this is really similar to, um, that idea that we were talking about, I think maybe before we officially started with Malcolm Gladwell's book Outliers is, when I found my way, it was not a plan. I happened to be one of the first folks to lose my job in the big recession of 2008. That was one of the few trends I kind of started, and it wasn't one that I really wanted to be a part of. But there I was, right? And so as I was trying to make sense of things, it's just this tidal wave of folks, getting laid off left and right, and so I that was a really powerful time in my life. And I just purchased a home, and then all of this talk of foreclosures was, starting to come around, but the full impact I don't think was quite apparent, or at least not talked about publicly. And I was kind of joking, like, "Ooh, well, I'm going to own my home for 2 years or something." And then here we are. I'm in it 11 months and I'm out of work. And so to think about, how am I paying a mortgage? How am I paying utilities? How am I going to feed myself? All of these things. And so that led to an exhaustive search for any job. I remember applying to Jenny Craig, and I got the rejection. No, it was an email within probably 15 minutes. And at that point, I don't even know how many jobs I applied for. It was thousands. And I thought, what does Jenny know about me? Jenny's already decided, that I am absolutely not even worth, an hour's worth of consideration, even if it's, fictitious. So dealing with that rejection and the sacrifice, and wondering, is this it? Am I gonna be swept back into poverty and never make it out? But the way I found my way to Substance Abuse Council is they were looking for volunteers, I believe, to help with some programming. And I'd applied for that. And I got to tell you, at that time, I don't know if they still do it, they had a really impressive onboarding protocol for volunteers. And from those conversations, they decided that maybe I had some skills to support some part-time contracted programming. And I didn't bother them with my desperado story, but inside I'm like, whoa, this is great. I get to keep the lights on, and what they were paying. I wasn't instant millionaire, but it was a hell of a lot better than $0 and
Right.
more than Jenny Craig was going to pay if she hadn't immediately decided that I wasn't worthy of employment there. So that's how I found my way to that, and it was really kind of interesting because I had no idea for some reason that work in the nonprofit sector existed. So it was an opportunity for me to live into my values, which felt kind of like a new experience. And that's just where it all kind of began, and I'm grateful for that
Yeah, you've talked
opportunity.
to me before and most recently about um, just the impact of having lived with, whether it's called poverty or little means or worrying about that next day or that next week. How has that impacted you on your life's journey, do you think? How has that evolved? Because I sense a different way of looking at it now from you than I might have before.
Well, it's easier to look at things with different eyes when you're not immersed in it,
Sure. Yeah.
right? And
Absolutely.
so that I'm very grateful for it, and it helps me to view things from other people's possible perspectives, and to think more holistically and realistically. You combine, life experience with, the brain science that our brains literally work differently when we're in crisis. And so, looking at present day, working kind of on the other side of things, if you will, um, I think sometimes we ask people to do things that where the ask is coming from our present life experience and perspective, and not from the point of view of the person within which we're trying to serve. And so we can make some assumptions, that people don't care, or they don't want to work hard enough, or they want everything for free, or whatever the language might be, and that is absolutely not the reality. And so it's having had access to opportunities, having some connectedness to know that, hey, not only are there people out there that care about me, there's people out there that have similar goals. There's people out there that are helping me find my way to other opportunities, or where my skills might be best put to use. And we forget, that not having your basic needs met, not having enough money, not having transportation, or what have you, this idea that kind of gets floated around sometimes, we all have the same 24 hours. That's just not true. There might be 24 hours in a day. That's true, although the concept of time is in question right now. But when it takes you 2 hours to get to work by bus, and it takes me 15 minutes, I have an hour and 45 minutes more, free time to work with. And so um that change, that being connected to people, certainly has impacted me. Surviving an adult, independent round of poverty, that I didn't love that experience when it was happening, but man, has that just given me so much confidence, and kind of power is coming to mind. I don't know if that's true, but um
Explain that. Why?
because I made it. And so um to think about, like, in that instance, I was not planning to not be working. I mean, I started working as young as I could find a job. Now, I didn't always do the best job because I was just a kid, but I started working. My first job was probably around 8, 10 years old, and then found the only place at that time that would hire a 15-year-old, and it's just been work, work, work. And part of that was because I wanted to take a financial burden off my mother. Now, how she experienced that might be vastly different, because as an adult, I've been like, wow, I really asked some ridiculous things of a single parent. But anyway, back to your question, to come out the other side, and to know that although in the midst of job loss, not knowing when you're going to get a job. I mean, I went 11 months without an income, from a job, and that affirmed that I made some sound decisions. For example, the house that I purchased, um, it I don't think it would make anybody's, number one home desired home list, or, Better Homes and Gardens isn't pounding on my door like, please let us feature you in the next issue. But it's certainly been affordable, and that was part of my decision making process. What does this look like? And so I didn't borrow a dollar. I refused offers of help, and I was so rooted in pride, it's ridiculous in hindsight. My mom would just say, "Are you okay?" And, "Yeah, mom, I'm fine." "Well, what are you doing? You need to go do things." "Well, I don't have any money, mom. Like, what would you like me to do?" And so I found ways to make light of it. I called it indoor camping. I kept my heat at like 55 or 60, so that the pipes wouldn't freeze. And sometimes that meant I had a hat on when I went to bed. But damn it, I was, oh, sorry. I was not going,
Okay.
hopefully that's the worst and the only one. Um, I, I didn't want to borrow money. And, people kept saying, let me help you out. And it was just this, I don't really know what all that was. But after that, I've had the courage to leave a very toxic work work environment. It's just made me more grounded in this idea that, keep going in the right direction, keep going towards what it is that you know in your heart to be right and what you really want to do. And those things will work out. It doesn't mean that it's going to be super easy all the time, but you're going to be okay. If you're lucky. I acknowledge there could be some other
There's
situations.
always a little luck. I'm gonna put up a couple of pictures.
Uh-oh.
And well, one's just newspaper clips. You said something earlier about being seen, and I don't know if you were referring to this time in your life, but this was after uh, the the 2011 storm, and I still remember how. And the picture looked a lot better in color, but I didn't have it in color. But how moving that photo was. I mean, what was that experience like for you?
Wow. So that's really interesting. That was a great lesson in uh, kind of that, um, the somebody is you, or be the change you wish to see in the world. Some folks that lived across the street from me. Well, let me back up just a minute. So in some of these storm situations that weren't as significant as that, somehow in this neighborhood we were lucky enough. There's a lot of old trees, and one year in particular, it was Fourth of July weekend, and a neighbor across the street's tree went down, took out the power, and it was so hot. And Consumers Energy was not coming here because it was a very small affected area, right? So they're not paying folks triple time or whatever they would get. And that was one of the worst weekends. It was when I was out of work, and I had just spent all the money I had stocking up on the freezer, food for the freezer, so that I could, that was that took a lot of thinking, and I lost all of that. And the response was, I didn't know what to do. I reached out to the utility company, whatever, and it was like, well, you didn't claim that on your insurance. Are you serious? Like, how much is that claim going to cost me for $200 of food, which to you is nothing, but to me was how I was going to sustain myself, right?
Hmm.
So, getting into the storm, I somehow we were lucky enough that didn't happen here, but the folks across the street kept going out. There was this nice bunch of people, and they kept saying, "Man, there's places where people can't even get out of their, neighborhoods. There's trees down everywhere." And I'm looking around like, What has happened?" It was so patchy, and I kept hearing that over and over everywhere. I'd see it on Facebook, my neighbors, and just thought, I'm just sitting here doing nothing. What, folks need help, but I didn't have a van. I didn't have a commercial kitchen, any of that. But what I did have, I was lucky enough to have a network of folks who had those things or would care. And so I didn't know what I was doing for sure. I didn't have a plan. I didn't have any resources, but I did know this idea of, going door to door, checking in with folks to see what they needed. And so some of the things they needed were things like batteries that people wouldn't have immediately thought of. Toilet paper was a big one. And going door to door, it was really kind of cool because I happened to go to the door of a woman who worked for a company that makes toilet paper. And I don't know how that came up with the conversation in hindsight, but I said, "Whoa, are you serious?" Because all of these people need toilet paper. And so it just snowballed from there. And it was really, I absolutely can't take credit for all that happened. That was, so many folks that jumped in. First Congregational Church was a site, getting meals together. Um, a friend Carmel had a van that we loaded up. I mean, people, I think at some point were like, don't go around her because she's going to send you out doing something, right? Kathy Zenda Wilson was one of the people that went canvassing. Rebecca Ogrodowski and her now late husband. I'd never met them in my life. They just saw a Facebook event, and I did enough logistics, like, hey, you go to this quadrant, we're going here, and it was just that through line, right? I didn't do all the work. I was just a connector. I did some of the work, but I couldn't have done that entirely on my own. It
Yeah.
was very, very moving. And especially to think of, here are people that were already in crisis. Like most days, did not have enough money, didn't have transportation, could have asked for the world. No one asked me for money when I was out. When I said, "What do you need?" It was diapers, or one person needed a can opener. Andy Humboldt brought his can opener from his house. And I think it alluded to the fact that maybe his wife didn't know, but we all came together. And hearing the stories in those neighborhoods, there were the one group of folks in particular took turns grilling up food, because they knew it was going to go bad. And so they just created this own community, kind of in and of itself, out of tragedy. And I think that when we're pushed to it, we are willing and able to do those things, but it's how do we show up for each other absent crisis? Where are we missing those day-to-day opportunities? Why do we have to wait until a windstorm, wipes out folks' homes and their ability to have food to eat and life on?
Yeah. I'm gonna throw this up in your face just a little bit. No, because you said I was just a connector. Um, and then I quoted you recently about connectedness is the magic of being alive. And that really was magical. Um, I'm not saying you no one is saying you did it. I won't say that you're doing it you did it alone. I'm not trying to convey that at all. But it was this idea that we're connected, that you really kind of touched that nerve and were able to like help people see the way that they wanted to be connected. You're speechless.
I was like, "Ooh, I'm in trouble."
No.
What did I do? Well, I appreciate the pushback, and I think that's a good example and reflection, back on kind of practice what you preach, and that we all have something to offer communities.
Yeah.
And what that look like can change, and sometimes it's consistent. And I remember an evaluator, that I've had the opportunity to work with a few times, and she was referencing, I think, one of Malcolm Gladwell's other books that I have not read. She goes, "You're a connector," and she was super excited about it. And I'm like, "Well, what does that mean? You're calling me a name. I want to know. I want to know what this name means." And it's really, it's kind of fun. Sometimes it's creepy, where I could have a conversation with someone and they might express that they need something in 2 days, 2 hours, whatever. Later, I'll find their match, and it's not intentional. So I don't know if that's a space that I'm just inherently meant to fill. I don't know if it's a testament to, having the privilege to be in a community that's small enough to where I'm able to more easily connect to folks. I'm sure it's maybe a combination of those things, but it's pretty exciting.
Yeah, yeah. And I was obviously being facetious. So, humility is not a bad trait. And in fact, when we used to give those George Awards out, it was a common trait of people that got things done. They didn't want credit for it. They didn't necessarily think they deserved credit for it, which of course made them all the more deserving of getting credit for it. Um, yeah, and already we're at 29 minutes, and I wanted to cut up. You're an entrepreneur in the space that you have, right? And you are in business now. I would never think of you as a business person, but I don't know why, because you clearly are. And let's go ahead and put these up. I mean, These are the only, cards that I buy, by the way, so, um, this is one of what do you call this? What's the tweet? The original tweet.
Yes, the original tweet.
We'll talk about that.
Gosh, that's a so folks who know me, this is no groundbreaking announcement, but there's always a story within a story within a story for me. But this, so going back, kind of following that idea of like the catalyst or opportunity. So I really have to credit Nick Jakubiak in part of that journey, also Elisa Jones, to getting to that point. Amongst some other folks that'll probably come into mind, but I, as a child, one of my favorite things about his book is when he talks about the journey of these two very similar men, both very intellectually gifted, and one was, very connected, more wealthy, and the other was in a rural community. And his primary barrier was, transportation, getting to his classes. One went on to, I think, be a Nobel Peace Prize winner, and the other dropped out of college and kept farming. For me, if I would have been in the right environment, connected to opportunities, would have absolutely been a creator. I would have been a performer, all of those arts things. But dance lessons were more expensive than was affordable in the family. Art was something that was encouraged. For me until seventh grade, and then it was I took a what did they call it? Gifted and Talented, I think was the program or something. I took the SAT and passed it when I was 12, and so then it was, oh my gosh, you have to follow this uber academic path, and I wanted that, so I was smart, but somehow society sent me this message like you can't be an artist and an intellectual. You've got to choose, and if you choose art, you're going to be broke and none of us are here for it. But if you, choose this academia, we're here for it too, but we're not necessarily going to be encouraging. So I had, this is a fun story with Kathy Zunda Wilson too. She sent me a message. I was at Substance Abuse Council. She says, "Hey, do you want to go to this painting thing or something?" And I thought she wanted to go to Lowe's to learn how to sponge paint or something, one of those types of classes. And I thought, no, that's not what I want to do. But it turned out to be one of those group painting things where they have somebody, you're all painting a similar painting. They're often done for fundraisers, etc. And so that's where we went. And it was interesting because I had always loved art, but life, slapped my hand. You can't do that. And so that was the first time that I'd painted really ever. And I couldn't follow the rules. I remember they wanted us to put these, to me, hideous baubles on this tree, and the colors didn't go. And so I just, in my mind, normally I'm let's follow the rules and get the affirmation, be teacher's pet, etc. But I'm like, I'm an adult. I paid for this. I can't get sent to the principal's office. I can't get fired. I'm going to make my own painting. And then I decided that I would, buy some supplies. I looked into it, acrylic paint, pretty affordable. I remember painting the equivalent to me of a stick in hindsight. Nice background, nice little stick, nothing else on it. And so that just kind of sat there, and I went through a really trying time, both personally and professionally at the same time. And I was beside myself, and I asked myself, what the bleep are you going to do about it? And I said, I'm going to go paint a bleeping bird. And where that came from, I don't know, but I went upstairs and I started painting a bird. And it was a really big exercise in vulnerability. I showed some of the pictures on Facebook, and people really reacted like, wow, that's really great. And maybe they were saying it to be nice. I don't know. I know my early birds were not necessarily the best, but that kind of motivated me. And then Nick, who, has been an art prize winner, is a great artist. He had reached out to me and said, I'll loan you this easel if you promise to keep painting. And that's all he did. I say all, but not like that. It was a small thing. That was a very big thing because I thought, here's somebody who I see as, a talented artist and saw something in me and took that initiative. And then fast forward a little bit further, Elisa Jones was working with, I forget what the organization was called, but at the time played a key role in Spring into the Arts. And
Downtown
I
Partnership, I think, wasn't it?
yeah, 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 yeah. And so I was at the gym and I would see her. I was at the Y, and that was one of the reasons I love the Y is the social part of it.
Yeah.
And she said, "Hey, by the way," she'd seen my posts on Facebook. She said, "You're doing Spring into the Arts, aren't you?" And I said, "Yes, I am." I had no idea what that meant. I didn't. But that was what I called the year of the honey badger, where I said, there's so much in life that I wanted to do, and I've let fear of failure or what have you get in the way. And so then I said, well, uh, whoops, that's not the word I used, but I guess I got to figure out what this means I have to do. And so from that, I made a commitment that I would paint at least 15 minutes a day. And between, I don't remember the time frame, but I think it was only a couple months. That led to me creating enough paintings. I think I had like 12 paintings for this show, which was a huge deal. I was petrified. I was like, oh my gosh, people are going to say, "Psh, what is this? Do you even know what you're doing?" And leading up to that, I wanted to have something to offer. And so a good friend of mine that was is an entrepreneur, said, you should sell your paintings. I'm not ready to let this go. This is a part of a personal journey for me. And I didn't do this to sell paintings, right? And we're in Battle Creek where people don't have the discretionary income to, buy paintings. He says, well, why would you nickel and dime yourself when you could, be selling paintings for $500? I said, that's flattering, but come on, dude. Like nobody knows who I am. Nobody here that I'm aware of is going to drop $500 on a painting that I made, but they might buy some cards. And so I quick did some homework, figured out how I could print them, not knowing how it would go. And I'm sure some of it was folks just trying to be supportive and encouraging, and some that really liked them, and that's really how all of that went down. There was no plan really. It's just kind of reactionary, but I'd made the conscious choice, like I am going to embrace opportunities when they come before me. And so
That's really cool. I'll tell you what I like about it. Number one, I like that they're blank. I
mhm,
don't send many cards, but when I do send a card, I feel like I had to write anything that's in it, and so I like that part of it. And because I like to look into the qualities of birds, the spiritual quality of birds, I can usually find an application, whether it's a birthday or sympathy or get well, to talk about that spirit inside. And here, speaking of Kathy Zenda Wilson, because we all talk about Kathy Zenda Wilson all the time. Me too, Kathy. Good to see you. We need to get together sometime for coffee. Um, anyway, we're getting close to 40 minutes. But you touched on something that I thought was really, poignant and important. And you'd said earlier, I was just a connector, and you said about I'm, I'm the easel, only an easel. It's but that's not meant to diminish the gift or
right,
diminish the role. It's often just the small things that we can do to play our part, right? Somebody I used to look, I still look up to him, but I used to see him all the time, Creighton Mabry. He had this saying, "Get in where you fit in," and that seems to be a pretty good strategy for finding what that next chapter is. Just listening to you talk. You agree with
right.
that?
Well, I think it's interesting. I just have learned to trust um in what my mind or my heart is telling me to do. And again, that's easier to do when I'm not in the midst of some of the common struggles that folks might be currently in. But like the cards and that connectedness, that was one of the things. So I love. I remember being called old fashioned, and I said, "Well, I don't care what you want to call it. I just think there's something so special about a handwritten note and receiving something in the mail that's not a bill, that's not this mass produced, capitalistic consumerism garbage. It's such a treat, especially handwritten things in this day and age. And the stories that people tell me about where those cards will say, "Oh, I visited a family member and they had one of your cards on the table," or a woman I worked with, she had one in a frame at her Airbnb. Some a friend of mine from school, they had purchased some cards to give to a friend of theirs that was terminally ill that loves birds, someone's grandmother that's in a nursing home. And so to be kind of a vehicle or a facilitator of joy and love and connectedness, I mean, sign me up for that. That's, I think we all have a choice and it doesn't always feel so obvious. We can either contribute to this sense of joy and happiness and healing and safety and all those more positive things in people's lives, including our own, or we can, participate in suffering and harm. And I don't want to be on that side of things. And yeah.
One other quote that I wrote down from our conversation preparing for this is that walking into love is a skill and a discipline. What does that
Yes.
mean to you?
Well, I think we can shy away. Like we accept all these feelings for ourselves and all these experiences, but for some reason when it comes to other people, maybe we diminish that. And so um an example that comes to mind, I have a family member that has a different life experience and some challenges, and the relationship for many many years was quite strained. And the reality is this person is just cannot love me, cannot show love in a way that I most readily receive it, right? But if I take myself out of it, my own needs and my own experiences, my own pain, whatever might be going on in that scenario, I can see that this person is trying, and that means something, right? And so I think sometimes we take for granted that people aren't walking visions of what we feel they should be. People don't have the same experiences. I ran into a woman that I used to work with, picking up some takeout. And because we knew each other, she shared this deep grief. I mean, she had lost her mother. And so here she's at work, she's navigating, change in ownership, this, just heart-wrenching grief. And but she's in customer service, so she has to pretend like everything is joyful. And when someone confides in you or unloads in you, there's that's a gift, that somebody trusts you enough to share what they're feeling, whether that's good or bad. And I think we just have to let go of all these assumptions and this fear of not saying the right things, or I might be misunderstood, and just walk in love. And it's letting go of those expectations or this idea that we're all against each other, or that there's, if someone else is successful or accesses something, that means that I can't. It's a practice, and knowing that more than one thing can be true at the same time. So someone maybe someone that's really not healthy for me to be around, but that doesn't mean they're, not a good human being or don't have any redemptive qualities. And so I think part of the discipline part is to make sure we're consciously aware that we're not viewing that person and their actions from our own perceived truth, and to be curious enough to let them tell their own story, and to accept that, hey, we're not always going to get the results that we might want. But we're all, I mean, so many of us carry this veil of heaviness, pain, whatever, but we put on a smile. So I heard this terminology the other day and it really struck me as smiling depressive. And I was that for many years, and if you asked a handful of folks, there'd be some folks who think, I've just lived this charmed, joyful, quirky life. And, that's great. I'm glad that I've put that energy out there, but we're all carrying some sort of grief, some haunting, trauma, etc. And I think we need to remember to show up in the way that we might want someone to show up for us, if that makes sense.
Laura, thank you so much for joining us this evening. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. It's always a pleasure to share time with you, and to, I'm not going to get mad about having a chance to highlight some of the folks that have been a great part of me getting to this next chapter, which is probably a collection of books, whatever you call
Collecting
it.
books. I look forward to them.
Yes.
Well,
So
thank
me
you
too.
again, and thanks for everybody who tuned in. Please share this with your friends. I know that people don't watch it live like they used to back in the days of the pandemic. And there's another message from Anne. So, and in 2 weeks, 2 weeks, we will have another guest who was suggested by Kathy Zenda Wilson because she's everywhere. Uh, Malachi Tripaldi. I hope I pronounced that last name correctly, Kathy. He is a graduate student in anthropology. And
Oh, cool.
well, and I'm not doing it justice, and I'm not going to do it justice because we're coming up on 45 minutes. But check it out in 2 weeks' time. And I look forward to seeing you and have a great evening. Enjoy this mild weather while it lasts. Take care,
Yeah.
everybody.
Thank you.